So my name is Estelle Weyl, and you spell my last name W-E-Y-L. And if anyone knows what this joke is, I like to do well actuallys. So the well actually for the previous talk, which was an amazing talk, is I have a book on the topic. It just came out a month ago, and you can do almost everything that you talked about in CSS without the JavaScript API. Already supported. So if you want the well actuallys, fighting words. No, the API, I was so excited to hear about it because there's so many things that are so hackish. But I explain the hacks, and then I say, don't do this. So it's going to be amazing when the API is actually supported. So what we are going to talk about today is how to step on wires and break things, or inclusive code, simple, fast, accessible, accessibility as performance. You want to pick your name, I don't care. But the slides are always going to be up at instartlogic github.io/p for presentation, inclusive markup. So who am I? My name is Estelle Weyl, as I already said. I am also known as Standardista online, and I have a Twitter account at EstelleVW. And the reason I speak at conferences is because I am a Twitter whore, and I like to be followed. In my spare time, I read specifications, so you don't have to, and I write about them. And I finished the Flexbox last Monday, and I added a chapter since then. So it should be coming out soon, and that's the CSS Definitive Guide on Flexbox. But right now, the transitions, animations just came out. Okay, I'd like to thank my employer. That's why I'm here. I actually get paid a salary now to speak at conferences. For 7 years, I spoke at conferences on my own dime. And now it's actually a job. So if you actually want a job traveling around the world, speaking at conferences, get a job as a developer advocate. In StartLogic, we do web performance. So we do, we're basically an intelligent CDN with machine learning. And we do JavaScript streaming, HTML streaming, image optimization, and all sorts of other fabulous things. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. What I'm here to talk about is to talk a little bit slower and to talk about making your website simple, fast, and accessible, or to think about accessibility and performance with web standards. If you use web standards, your site will be accessible and it will be performant. So you don't have to use any of the frameworks that we talked about today. But that's a different fight for a different day over there. So what I'm going to talk is a little bit about the features. And the issues. So what are the issues that we've seen, and what are the features that can handle those with solutions? And we all know the prescriptions, so I'm going to give you a few solutions to help you just try to think, because my solutions are for 3 issues that I came across. And those aren't going to be your issues, but just to show you how I thought about them, that might help you. So let's start off with a little bit about accessibility. This is what it looks like when a screen reader reads a screen, and all you have is links that say click here. They tab through the page, and they hit every link because those have a tab index automatically, preferably in source order, and you don't actually use tab index. Who here uses tab index? I love you all. Okay. So this is not accessible. To hear click here, click here, click here, you don't know what you're actually clicking on. And let's see if this will play, because usually it doesn't. Nah, it doesn't want. Oh, yeah, there it goes. So who here can read his lips? What's he saying? Okay. I've never seen anyone. I picked this one because he was speaking so fast, I couldn't even tell if he was speaking English. This is what a website sounds like, your video sounds like if you're not using closed captioning. This is what your audio sounds like if someone is wearing headphones or that are broken, or like, at the airport, and they're trying to get instructions from you, and they're, like, anyone try to be on the phone out in the lobby with the music? You can't do it. So that's kind of what audio is like. And some of you might be colorblind. I'm not going to ask who is. This might not be legible. It might also not be legible if you have cognitive differences and you can't read weird stuff that I put up. And I made this example, and I don't know how to use Photoshop. So that was my attempt at making something inaccessible. So we talk a lot about accessibility and disabilities. And I thought this quote was really good when I saw it. It was, disability, it's a mismatch in interaction between the features of a person's body and the features of the environment in which they live. So disability is not something permanent. I am disabled sometimes. I wear granny glasses. So I am disabled when I'm using this because it's small print, but I'm not disabled when I'm using this on most sites because I can increase the font. We've all benefited from what has been done to improve accessibility for, hello. Usually the disability symbol is a wheelchair. And no one here is in a wheelchair. But some of you might have been pushing a baby carriage, and I know that I was pulling a suitcase. So all of us have benefited, whether we're riding a bike or a skateboard or whatever, from the American Disabilities Act, which says the curbs need to go down so that you can have for wheelchair access. Everyone has benefited from that. So when we think of disabilities, we think of paraplegic, blind, dyslexia, quadriplegic, and hard of hearing. But you can also think of the disabilities of your users, which are temporary, such as wearing stilettos might make it a little bit more difficult to run or to walk on grass. The sun glare in your eyes makes it harder to read your screen. You might have someone who's distracted or carrying a baby. These are things that you don't need to think about, those permanent disabilities. We really need to be designing as well for the temporary ones. So when we come to disabilities, most of us on the web think about being visually impaired. And there is a spec, it's the Accessible Rich Internet Applications. And that actually is a spec that enables us to make accessible apps which otherwise would not be accessible. But one thing to note about ARIA is that the #1 rule of ARIA, and I'm quoting myself here because I'm so important, mostly because I couldn't find anyone else quoting on it. The first rule of ARIA is don't use ARIA, right? If there's a semantic HTML element, use that instead. ARIA is a stopgap when you fail to make your site accessible. So before I talk about the rest of my talk, I do want to talk a little bit about performance because I said, it's simple, fast, and accessible. So we got the accessible. Let's get the performance out of the way. So Stephen Gundy, I have no clue who this person is. He said, I remember when 3G was primary mobile speed. It was slow, but it still worked. So now when my phone says 3G, it becomes completely useless. Most people blame their phone carrier. It's all their fault. It's not actually their fault. In 2010, when 3G was most prominent, a website was 702 kilobytes on average. A few months ago, in 2016, it was more than 3 times that. So the 3G is still 3G. It hasn't gone up to 4G or whatever BS term they're using nowadays. I like the term Li-Fi, which is line that you're on Wi-Fi. So it's gone up by 339%. So I did this 2 different ways. 339%, if I use an increase on the radius, this is what it looks like. If I use the area, this is what it looks like. So I should be using the area, but this is way more impressive in terms of a difference. But one thing you'll note is this is images, the outside one, and this is JavaScript. It's pretty much the same percentage-wise, it's just everything is tripled. With the exception is we have fonts here, and we used to have Flash there. So it's pretty much, it's grown proportionally, all of them. So we have prescriptions. There's image optimization prescriptions, and images are your lowest hanging fruit. They're generally the thing, if you optimize, you get the biggest bang for your buck. So you can gzip, and gzip doesn't actually do anything for binary, but it does for SVG. You can remove image data, resize, optimize, like by bringing it down, your JPEGs down to the right size, using the right image format, sending WebP to Chrome that supports it, and there's like XR JPEG or something like that for Microsoft. You can reduce the number of images, and you can leverage CSS. So I like to leverage CSS. Most of my talk, I did an 8-hour workshop one day, and I had 3 images in the entire deck, and everything else was done with CSS. One note is if you do include an image, use an alt attribute It's not accessible if you don't, even if it's an empty alt attribute. Okay. So then we have other prescriptions like page speed. So page speed, you've probably seen most of these rules, which are minimize request sizes, leverage caching, minify everything, defer your JavaScript, that's why we've been putting in the footer, optimize images, I already said, and a few other rules. And if you want to, this is actually a resource. This deck is a resource, and all of these have descriptions and explanations. I believe these do too, yep. So you can actually go back. I'm not going to go through everything because I do have a time limit, and I also don't want everyone to fall asleep. So then we have usability rules, like configuring the viewport. If you configure the viewport, people on mobile will like you. If you don't save viewport, if you don't include the viewport meta tag, people will not like you. These are also rules at page speed. Then we have accessibility guidelines. So these are prescriptions. Provide alt, I already talked about that. Someone else talked about using color. Don't rely on color alone, and make sure that your colors, that things are legible, there's enough contrast. Use markup, HTML and CSS, and do so properly. That is the main gist of my talk. If you use HTML, your site will be accessible. If you use images, you have to explain what they are. If you use SVG, you can make them accessible. If you use Canvas, there is no way to make it accessible, or there is, but it's beyond what any normal human being would do in a day's work. These were the rules from 1998. They are still all valid. They've been expanded upon, which and basically summarized in terms of making your site perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And there are design rules. Let's not go into those. And more design rules. There's actually a poster. I have a link right up here to get a poster. So for your design team, put this poster up. You know, it basically makes sure your links are recognizable. It's not just that changing the color is not enough if you don't have a contrast. Make it, you definitely want it to have a ring around it, or highlight color, or something when someone tabs to it. And when someone touches it on a device. So focus on that. So my whole talk came about because I did a stint at Visa. Don't do a stint at Visa. So this is their page, and I can't actually include it, so this is just an image of a page. But it is a form. Does that look like a form? Right? It has 2 images, it has some SVG. It has the Visa checkout. It has the background image, which is repeated, so it should be small. And it has the American flags and a little icon in the bottom corner. It also has 55,000 lines of JavaScript. It's a form. That's what I call resume-driven development. So we talked about Polymer today, and we talked about React. This site includes React, it includes jQuery, it includes Backbone, includes 41 dependencies. And while I was there, they wanted to include Polymer to do an import. And I lost my shit. And I came up with this talk. So don't do resume-driven development, because this is what happens. This is their page, web page test. If you see that line right there, has anyone seen that line be thicker than just like 1 pixel wide? That is the JavaScript creating DOM nodes. And this line right here is the main thread being thrashed. Now, most people don't even know what their own web page test looks like. So I experience Visa, so I can make fun of them. And I don't know if they can sue me. I hope not. Let me just go on to the next. So it's 8 seconds, but their DOM content loaded is somewhere between 3 and 3.5. So 3 seconds isn't too bad, but their site is not usable because when the main thread is occupied, you can't have human interaction with it. So they basically have 7.5 to 8 seconds or 5 seconds where it's loaded and no one can touch the screen. Okay, so what did I do? I recoded it. It took me 3 weeks working part-time because I really was not that into the job. I I recoded it, and I did it in 1,000 lines of JavaScript, or under 1,000 lines of JavaScript, under 1,000 lines of CSS, and under 1,000 lines of HTML, or whatever HTML I needed. I never counted the lines of HTML. Does that look like the previous one? Yeah. So let's look at my web page test. I don't see any CPU thrashing, and I don't even see the pink line. Yeah, it's there, I think. I need my granny glasses, and I don't have them on. So yeah, the DOM content loaded. I'm not creating any. Yeah. So that didn't really show you what was really happening. Let me show you what was really happening through this view. This is their version, right, on the same timeline as my version. This was them. This is me. So my version does not integrate with the back end, but that's just a JSON call integrating with the back end, right? What was causing their problem is front-end JavaScript. So, you know, like here I am harping on, I'm not actually harping on frameworks. I think, fine, use a framework, but the keyword there is singular. The way I view frameworks and jQuery, like I used to use jQuery. I don't always go to production with jQuery because I'm like, I only need it for 3 things. When I'm prototyping, I use jQuery, but I use it as a scaffolding. And I remove that scaffold before I go into production. So yeah, use the tools you need to quickly prototype, but then don't put in the 16 or 41 dependencies. So let me show you a few features that I did. Here's one of them, right there. It's a picker. I think that was 3 lines of JavaScript. And then the other thing is, there's labels. I guess I have to go here. There's this carousel that I did in a few lines. Well, let me just show you the examples of what my solutions were. So one thing that they had, which was using, if we see down here, way at the bottom, they were using 63.3 kilobytes to do input masking. And the reason that they had jQuery was for the input masking, because they were using React as their base. So they were pulling in jQuery to do input masking and cookies, I think. And cookies is like 3 lines of JavaScript. It's a native function that every browser supports. So what is input masking? If I go to demo and we hope the website works and we increase this, let's say I have a date. Here it is. I type in 5/21. When I typed in the 2, it moved it over to 02. I'm not sure exactly why I did that. So maybe my version actually works better than them. So it tells me it's valid. It showed that mask. You see here, here's that mask again, mm/dd/yy. So I recreated this. I thought a little bit outside the box, and I created it with 2 kilobytes. The original version was 125 lines of JavaScript, and it does all the validation for any input type. 125 lines of JavaScript, and it does the validation for any input type. Now it's like 175 because it does auto-initiation. And someone who works on the jQuery team helped me out a little bit, making it a little bit more robust. So what does it do? I can type in 5, and then 16, and it does the exact same thing that the other one did. And I can do a zip code, and here's a Canadian zip code, and I'm typing 666, and it's not letting me because that is not valid. It has to be A6. So it's only letting me do valid numbers. And if I want to, I can cut and paste. And that's 2 kilobytes. So what did I do? I thought outside the box. There's a GitHub repo for this. And this is completely accessible, and it uses pure HTML. So this is the HTML5 input types. Everyone see a lot of green? There's a lot of green there. Date time was deprecated. It's not supported. And multiple on ranges, input type range is not yet supported. But that's neither here nor there. What is, yeah. So here, Let me just increase it again. Oh, it doesn't want to increase. Okay, so the code that I used is input for the zip code was input ID equals zip. And why did I put an ID? Is that part of my script? No, it's required to associate with a label. So include your labels to make it accessible. Then I said type tel. I'm not doing a telephone number, but number would be inappropriate here because I do not want someone to use the spinner to go from 0000 to 94115, which is the San Francisco zip code. Class is masked. That's the key. It says to the JavaScript, this is one of the ones I want to mask. Placeholder is the mask that I want. And the pattern is a fully supported HTML5 attribute. And if it's not supported, like if you're still supporting Netscape 4.7, it actually works because HTML accepts attributes. You can still use JavaScript to grab attributes and values even if it has no clue what that is. And then I put a title because anytime an element is required in a certain format, you want to tell your user, you want to be accessible and tell them what it is. So that is the code. You're using HTML. Got to be able to get to the next slide. How does it work? The JavaScript puts a span around the input. Well, let me do it from the drawing first. No, let me do it here. So it puts a span around the input called shell, and then it puts a span, which is the placeholder, which takes that placeholder and puts it there. So the placeholder is right here. That was the 5 X's that we saw earlier, right? And it puts an empty I here, and that is what it's going to fill. So as you type the number 1, 2, 3, it puts the 1, 2, 3 into the I and has an XX left over. So that's what the JavaScript is doing. It's on key up. It's just taking the value and doing what's remaining in the value. The previous one did on key up as well. So all I did was think outside the box a little bit, put a span behind the input. The only problem with this in terms of features is it has to be transparent, a transparent input, but you can actually put it on top and use pointer events none. I don't know if you guys know what pointer events none does. Pointer events are, most people think of them as touch events, but pointer events is actually part of the CSS specification as well, and in terms of that, it's when you have a pointer, you can actually go through an element on the page and hit the thing behind it. So pointer events none is what you would use if you want to put it behind there. And then with a little bit of CSS, I basically say, oh, that's a JavaScript. I already explained the JavaScript. With the CSS, I say that I either make it transparent, make it opacity of 0, or make it visibly hidden. Any of those 3 work. 1 line of CSS for the I, and 5 lines of CSS to put the thing where it's supposed to be. So that is accessible input masking. Let's talk a little bit about accessibility. For a form control to be accessible, you need to have a label, right? That is required. You can either do an implicit or you can do an explicit label. There are 2 other features that the screen reader will read prior to the label if you have them. The ARIA labeled by, so you can have more than 1 label, or you can put an ARIA label directly in your element, like a title tag. Titles attribute. Then it will read the label if neither of those are present. If none of those are present, it will read the placeholder. If the placeholder isn't present, it will read the title. And if you don't have one of those 5, you should be fired from your job because your site is not accessible and you had 5 options and you couldn't figure any of them out. I have no opinion on anything. Okay, so I think we've covered this one. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, there is I was so happy that Visa actually implemented this. And what they did is they made a React component. And they didn't actually do it correctly. It was 125 lines of JavaScript. I wrote the React module for it. And they decided to do resume-driven development, and it doesn't actually validate. So let me just cover one more thing on these, which is the pattern attribute right there. Pattern is an attribute that is supported, and it basically says match against this pattern. Your CSS, you can say valid or invalid, and you can change colors. That's how well supported it is. But you can use it in your JavaScript to say, what pattern am I supposed to be matching? That pattern. You don't need to put your patterns in your JavaScript anymore. They can be right in your HTML. Okay. So another thing they had was a carousel. So in this example of a carousel, and I'll make it bigger, this carousel doesn't actually do anything. It has 5 addresses, but it doesn't actually submit anywhere. But if I hit tab, and you can see barely right there that this has a little circle around it, I am not a graphic designer. We needed a graphic designer to make this prettier and actually more accessible to people with vision. I made this really accessible to people without vision. But if I hit the right arrow, if I hit the left arrow, it works, right? These are clickable, but these are not tabbable. And I'll explain why in a moment. So this looks, who here thinks this looks like a carousel? That's it? Okay, who here is asleep? Oh wait, they won't hold up their arms. Okay, so there's a Git repo for this too. This is the way that they originally coded this as a React component. And I'm not saying don't create React components. I'm just saying don't do this. So they didn't think about accessibility. They have to be accessible. They were actually thinking about accessibility, but they thought, let's do a React component and then let's make it accessible. So they have aria hidden true, aria label, aria selected true, tab index, role option, aria label, but they already had an aria label. Right there, they have 2 aria labels. And then they had, well, let's not go over the bad way of doing it. Let's go over the right way of doing it. This is my version. It says field set. Inside a field set, you can do a legend. And in my legend, I said select an address to edit. And then I had an unordered list of addresses. And they're all labels. So my label for address 1 is right there. And then below, I have input radio, and it has address 1, and they're associated. So because I used semantic HTML, I got keyboard access for free. The right arrow and the left arrow go through the radio button. Because I used accessible, just semantic markup, I have a field set. That field set is going to say, this is what's going on in here, right? So, well, let's go here first. Carousels have 4 requirements: the structure, functionality, animations, and full content. My full content was available. The animation can be controlled, right and left arrow. Functionality, I displayed the items one at a time. And structure, it has structure that I later enhanced with CSS. So here's another one that looks a little bit more like a carousel you're used to. It actually is a carousel of carousels. Very meta. And it works the same way. The thing is, it's not actually a carousel. So why is it not a carousel if it looks exactly like a carousel? I can't call it a carousel because people who are actually using assistive technology think to themselves when they get to it, I have all the information and it works. Therefore, it's not a carousel. So I'm not calling it a carousel because with tech support or whatever, if you say carousel, they're like, I expect to be told by the assistive technology, your page has changed. Why do we need to tell someone the page has changed when it's completely accessible and all there for them in the first place? So in this case, it's completely all there for them in the first place. Because let's look at the code again. It's all there. There's a label 1, and when they click on the arrow, they get read label 2. I'm not going to turn my screen reader on. I was going to, but I think that everyone wants to go drinking, and I don't want to take extra time before that happens. So the JavaScript for this is right here. Function, merry-go-round change the class of the merry-go-round. And then in my CSS, I change the left. Now, the reason that this is crappy CSS is because I'm actually changing left, and that's not good for animations. You want to change the transition, but because I have it in the middle of the page instead of taking the whole page, and I only wanted one element, I couldn't do it that way. But if you have a shell, a parent shell that says overflow hidden, you can actually do it this way. I mean, you can do it the correct way with transitions and translate left. Okay. So here we go to the last one. So the last one, oh, just one more thing. Let me just reiterate, sorry. 3 lines of JavaScript, right? Who here has ever created a carousel without importing it in a library? People have, but if you, so one thing I do need to note on the carousel is the left and the right arrow. This arrow right here, there's a rule in ARIA or in WCAG or one of those where you can't have something that can get keyboard focus that you don't read to the screen reader. So if I click on this arrow, a screen reader, hits that arrow, they then need to be told that when you clicked on it, the screen changed. They don't need to know that the screen changed. They have all the information. They just get it slightly differently. We get it one at a time. They get all 5 at the same time. They can choose to skip all 5 of them, just like we can choose to skip it. So the arrows do not have keyboard focus, which is fine because they don't need keyboard focus because the right and left arrows work, as in the right and left arrows on your keyboard. So they don't need to hit this right here because they're hitting this right there. So in the GitHub repo, there is the JavaScript if you want to add the arrows, but just realize all you need is an event listener and 3 lines of JavaScript and a 7-line function in your CSS to make that work. Okay, here, the last thing I want to cover is this. This is, you select a country and that's all it does, right? Anyone guess on what I used to create this? It's actually a Polymer component. Very well done, touche, thank you. So this is what Visa used. They use section, role list box, ARIA label, with the a label for the section, which then has to get tab index to actually get read. And then they did a section with a role of option with a tab index of -1, with ARIA selected equals true, and the bunch of roles and options for everyone else. And then they had a label with no input, except for the role was option, and it confused me. It worked. It's accessible. But this is so backwards when you can just listen to the first. I did find one other quote on the first rule of ARIA. Here it says it's Monday, the 3rd of April, 2016, and today it's July 20th or 19th? Late-ish July. And the first rule of ARIA is still don't use ARIA if you don't need to. So this is my version. I did a field set with a legend and inputs with labels. And then, typical CSS. There's nothing here other than the fact that I use Sass, so it's nested. But I said the field set. There's nothing here that no one knows. Even if you don't know Sass, you can still read this. And then there's a footer open and close. So when you click it, actually changes the class of the footer to open or closed. And then when you hover over a radius, a label, or use your keyboard, it changes the presentation to background gray. And it was 3 lines of JavaScript, but I'm trying to make it 0, so I haven't actually done the repo yet for it. So the gist of this whole talk is to think outside the box. And think of your tools as scaffolding. Don't put everything into production, because you have to realize that when you're prototyping, for visual users, there's actually stuff behind the scenes. So you have to think about accessibility while you're developing. There are some frameworks that think about accessibility for you, but you don't need to put a framework in to think about accessibility. All you have to do is use semantic HTML. And when you need it, ARIA is there to help you out. So I'm not saying don't use ARIA, but use it when you need it, not as a crutch. So just a few more things. There's some resources here. There's my books here, and that's about it. And one other thing is, I would like to give a huge hand to the organizers of this conference. And I have t-shirts to give away.